We were never supposed to work this hard. On the left, 1979. Denim jacket, safety goggles, a single machine humming under calloused hands. At the end of the shift, the time card punches with a satisfying mechanical thunk. That sound meant something. It meant the mortgage payment on a 3-bedroom house 15 minutes away. It meant groceries without mental arithmetic at the checkout. It meant a savings account that actually saved. On the right, today, same building, same concrete floors, but the worker now monitors 3 automated production lines from a glowing tablet. The metrics are spectacular. This one person produces what 3 workers produced in 1979. Triple the output, triple the value created. When they clock out, the system makes a cheerful digital ding. That sound means something too. It means checking the bank balance before buying gas. It means the weekend gig starts in 4 hours. It means rent on a smaller apartment 40 minutes away just went up again. Both workers were promised the same deal: work hard, produce value, receive proportional reward. One of them got the reward. The other got the ding. Now here's the part most people never ask. If today's worker produces more value than ever before, where did the extra value go? Because it didn't disappear, and it didn't stop being created. In fact, the moment this deal broke is visible down to the exact year. You can see it on a graph. You can point to it with your finger. And once you see it, you start to realize something unsettling. Every piece of advice you've been given about work for the last 4 decades was built on rules that no longer applied. In a moment, I'm going to show you the year the deal snapped, and what changed so quietly that most people didn't notice until decades later. But first, there's something you need to understand. If you entered the workforce after that year, you never experienced the system your parents described. You were taught the rules of a game after the scoring system had already been rewired. And the consequences of that change still shape every performance review, every raise request, and every exhausted conversation about why working harder doesn't seem to move anything forward anymore. The crack appeared in 1979. And once you see what happened there, the rest of your working life suddenly makes sense. Remember the question from the factory? If workers were producing more value than ever before, where did the extra value go? To answer that, we don't need theory. We don't need opinion. We just need one graph. Watch it emerge. 2 lines stretch across the screen, from 1948 to 1979. The lower line is median worker compensation. The upper line is productivity. How much value workers produce per hour? For 31 years, the lines move together. When productivity rises, pay rises. When workers produce more, they earn more. Not perfectly, not evenly, but consistently. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't generosity. It was how the system was built to function. Now watch what happens next. In 1979, the lines split. Productivity keeps climbing at steadily, relentlessly. Worker pay almost stops. By 2018, productivity has risen more than 64%. Worker compensation has risen less than 16%. That gap isn't theoretical. It isn't abstract. It's the missing money in your paycheck. And here's the part most people don't realize. If you entered the workforce after 1979, you never experienced the system where effort and reward move together. Every job you've ever had existed after the break. Every performance review, every raise that didn't come, every year productivity targets increased while pay stayed flat. You weren't failing inside a working system. You were working inside a system that had already changed. Now, this is where people usually stop. They look at the graph and say, well, that's just globalization, or technology, or competition, or inevitability. But graphs don't change themselves. The rules that decide where value flows had to change first. And those changes didn't happen all at once. They happened quietly, incrementally, through incentives that sounded reasonable on their own. In the next section, we're going to look at how those incentives shifted, not to assign blame, but to understand why the same advice stopped working. Because once you see what changed, something uncomfortable becomes clear. The system didn't stop rewarding productivity, it just stopped rewarding workers for it. Up to this point, the story looks like a mystery. Productivity rises, pay stops rising, the graph breaks. So what changed? Not overnight, not with a single law, and not with a dramatic announcement anyone remembers. Instead, the incentives that decided where productivity gains flowed were quietly rewritten. Let's start with the most important mechanism that used to convert productivity into paid unions. In 1979, about 27% of American workers were union members. That mattered, not politically, but structurally. When productivity increased, unions negotiated for higher wages. When companies became more efficient, workers claimed a share of that efficiency. That was the transmission system. Now watch what happens when that system weakens. By 2020, union membership falls to around 10%. The value is still being created, but the mechanism that pushed it into paychecks is fading. The system didn't stop producing gains, it stopped distributing them the same way. At the same time, a new pathway opened. In 1982, U.S. regulations changed to allow widespread corporate stock buybacks. For the first time, companies can legally redirect profits into boosting their own stock prices at scale. This creates a new incentive. Productivity gains no longer need to raise wages to be successful. They can be routed into shareholder returns instead. And something else changes right alongside it. Executive compensation restructures around stock performance. Bonuses, options, equity grants. Now the people making decisions about labor costs are personally rewarded when wages stay low and stock prices rise. No conspiracy, no villain monologue, just incentives pointing in a different direction. Then automation accelerates. Machines increase output dramatically. Software replaces tasks, efficiency improves. This should have made work easier. It should have reduced human strain. But in a system where productivity gains no longer flow to workers, automation does something else instead. It weakens bargaining power. Machines don't negotiate. They don't expect raises. They don't convert efficiency into leverage. So productivity rises again, and again, and again. Each of these changes on its own sounds reasonable. Efficiency, modernization, innovation. But together, they quietly rewrite the rules of the deal. The system doesn't stop rewarding productivity. It just starts rewarding it somewhere else. If this feels abstract, it won't for long. In the next section, we're going to look at what happened after the rules changed. Not in boardrooms or graphs, but in everyday life. Because once the incentives shifted, something else had to change too. The story people were told about why work stopped paying off. Once the rules of the system changed, something else had to change with them, the explanation. Because when effort stops producing reward, people don't immediately blame the system. They look inward. And starting in the 1980s, a new story begins to spread. You've heard it your entire life. Work harder, be more productive, add more value, hustle, optimize, improve yourself. At first, this advice made sense. It had worked before. But here's the timing most people miss. As the link between productivity and pay broke, the message to work harder intensified. The less the system rewarded effort, the more effort was demanded. Motivational posters filled offices. Corporate training programs multiplied. Self-help became an industry. Every message pointed in the same direction. If you're struggling, it's because you're not doing enough. Not because the rules changed, because you weren't keeping up. This wasn't cruelty, it was misdiagnosis. The advice wasn't describing the system people were actually working in anymore. It was describing the system that existed before 1979. Like handing someone a map to a bridge that no longer exists, then blaming them for not crossing the river. Look at a modern résumé. Increased efficiency by 40%. Streamlined operations. Delivered more with fewer resources. These are real achievements. They represent real skill and real effort. But in a system where productivity gains no longer trigger proportional pay, they produce a strange outcome. More output, same compensation, sometimes less. So people internalize the gap. They assume the problem is personal. They work longer hours. They take on side gigs. They learn new skills. They optimize everything except rest. Each adjustment feels reasonable on its own. But together, they form a pattern. People trying to personally solve a problem that was created structurally. By the time this realization sets in, exhaustion has already done its work. And here's the part that matters for what comes next. When a system stops rewarding effort, it doesn't reduce effort, it increases it. Because people don't stop believing in the promise all at once. They push harder. In the next section, we're going to look at what that prolonged push does to people. Not statistically, but personally. Because the exhaustion you feel didn't come from laziness or lack of discipline. It came from running inside a system that kept asking for more while quietly giving back less. By the time most people start questioning the story, something else has already happened. They're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that settles deeper, into posture, into mood, into expectations. It shows up late at night at a kitchen table, laptop open to a budget spreadsheet, bills stacked nearby, a half-empty coffee mug that hasn't helped in hours. The numbers don't make sense. You did what you were told. You stayed late. You learned new skills. You became more efficient. You produced more value than the people before you ever did. And still, you're behind. That feeling of the quiet guilt that maybe you didn't do enough didn't come from laziness. It came from living inside the gap. Every time you worked overtime and didn't move forward, you weren't failing. You were experiencing the documented break between productivity and pay. Every time you compared your situation to your parents, a single income, a house, stability, you weren't imagining things. You were seeing two different systems at work. Your parents weren't tougher. They weren't smarter. They didn't hustle harder. They worked inside a system that still shared what it produced. You didn't. So you compensated. You took on side work. You optimized your schedule. You traded rest for output. Not because you wanted more, but because standing still felt like falling behind. This is the part people rarely talk about. When effort stops producing security, people don't stop trying. They try harder, they push longer, they accept less, they internalize the pressure. Over time, that pressure becomes exhaustion. Not because work itself is bad, but because the reward stopped matching the effort. The weight you've been carrying, the sense that you should be further along by now, was never meant to be carried by one person. It's the result of a system asking individuals to absorb a structural break. And most people never realize that's what's happening. They just feel tired. In the next section, we're going to look at why this moment feels different. Why the pressure seems to be accelerating instead of easing. Because the gap didn't close, it widened. And new technology is pushing on the same fault line all over again. Up to now, everything we've talked about happened gradually. The break in 1979 unfolded slowly enough that most people didn't notice it while it was happening. This moment is different because now the same pattern is accelerating in real time. The productivity line on that graph isn't just rising anymore, it's steepening. Artificial intelligence to automation. Systems that allow one person to do the work of 5. This should be a breakthrough. More output with less effort is the definition of progress. But here's the problem. The system that decides where those gains go never changed after 1979. So when productivity explodes again, the same question returns. Faster, louder, and harder to ignore. Who benefits? You can already see the pattern repeating. Companies announce efficiency breakthroughs. Hiring slows. Stock prices rise. Pay stays flat. These aren't contradictions. They're the same incentives operating at a higher speed. In the past, this shift took decades to become obvious. This time, it's happening fast enough for people to feel it immediately. Job descriptions demanding more skills for less pay. Temporary roles replacing permanent ones. Doing more with less becoming permanent policy instead of a short-term adjustment. The technology isn't the problem. Technology increases what humans can create. The problem is that the rules for sharing what gets created never caught up. And unless those rules change, the gap that opened in 1979 doesn't close. It widens. Which brings us back to the factory, and to the question that decides how this story ends. Let's go back to the factory. Same building, same concrete floors, same purpose. In 1979, the worker clocked out and heard a mechanical thunk. That sound marked a transaction. Effort in, pay out, not generosity, not charity, an exchange that worked. The worker worked hard. The system shared what was produced. Today's worker clocks out and hears a digital ding. It doesn't mark an exchange. It marks a measurement. How much value was created, how efficiently it was produced, but not how it will be shared. That difference is the entire story. The workers aren't different people. They're not lazier. They're not less disciplined. Put the 1979 worker into today's economy, and they struggle the same way. Put Put today's worker into the earlier system, and the outcomes flip. Because the outcome was never about individual virtue, it was about the structure surrounding the individual. Understanding this doesn't fix the problem overnight. The gap doesn't close just because it has a name, but it does something important. It takes the weight off your shoulders. It explains why doing everything right didn't lead where you expected, why effort stopped feeling like progress, why exhaustion became the default. You weren't failing. You were operating inside rules that changed quietly and never changed back. The factory didn't forget how to pay. It was taught a new system, one that measures productivity with precision but distributes reward differently. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The deal you were promised wasn't a lie when it was made. It just stopped being honored before you ever got a chance to participate in it. The first step toward any different outcome is recognizing that distinction. Not to assign blame, not to demand answers, but to understand the world you're actually working in, not the one you were told still existed. The factory remembers the deal that worked. The question is whether we do.